Hook, imagine waking up one morning, stepping out onto your porch, and seeing strangers pouring concrete right through your front yard. Not a sidewalk, not a driveway you asked for. No. A road. A road that cuts your land in half, without warning, without permission, without even a conversation. And then, because the universe sometimes has a dark sense of humor, those same people who trespassed and carved up your property have the audacity to slap you with a lawsuit, claiming you are in the wrong. That's exactly what happened to me. And if you think I just rolled over and let them take everything I'd worked for, you're wrong. Because what started as the worst chapter of my life ended with me not only winning back what was mine, but taking control of the very HOA that thought they could destroy me. This is my story. The morning it all began, I remember it vividly, the sound of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was just another construction project somewhere in the neighborhood. But the low rumble of engines felt too close, and when I stepped outside, coffee still in hand, my jaw nearly hit the ground. There they were, a crew of men in hard hats, bright neon vests, and heavy equipment, carving a wide, dusty trench right through my property. I'm not talking about a small corner, either. This was the heart of my land. They had already flattened part of my garden, torn out my split rail fence, and were laying down gravel like they owned the place. I rushed down the driveway, waving my arms like a madman. "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" One of the workers cut the engine of his bulldozer and gave me the kind of look people give to an angry dog barking behind a fence. Calm, but detached. He pulled out a clipboard and said flatly, "We're putting in a road. HOA orders." HOA. I barked back. "This is my property. You can't just dig up my yard." But he just shrugged. "Take it up with them." And, before I could say another word, the machine roared back to life, drowning me out as they went back to tearing up the land I had poured years of sweat into. I stood there in disbelief. My wife, Emily, came rushing out, her hands covering her mouth as she looked at the destruction. The rose bushes she had planted for our wedding anniversary. Gone. The oak tree our kids used to climb, already marked with spray paint for removal. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The first confrontation, that afternoon, I stormed into the HOA office. Our neighborhood's HOA was notorious for being, let's just say, overbearing. They fined people for leaving their trash cans out for an extra day. They dictated the exact shade of beige you could paint your house. And they even once threatened my neighbor over the size of his mailbox. But until that morning, they had never crossed me directly. The office smelled of coffee and printer ink. Behind the desk sat Karen, the HOA president. Yes, her name was really Karen. Her smile was thin, plastic, and laced with the kind of arrogance only a person drunk on minor power could carry. "I need to know why there's a road being built through my property," I demanded, slamming my hand down on her desk. She didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly pulled a file from a drawer, slid it toward me, and said, "The HOA board voted on the expansion last month. The road improves access to the new lots being developed. It's for the benefit of the community. My land is not community property." I snapped. Karen gave me that smug look, the kind that made my blood boil. "Actually," she said sweetly, "according to our interpretation of the bylaws, that section of your land falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. It was always designated as a potential easement." I flipped through the paperwork, my hands shaking with rage. The documents were vague, deliberately so. There was no direct evidence that the HOA had any legal claim, but they were banking on me not knowing that. "This is illegal," I told her. "You can't just take my property." She leaned back in her chair, lacing her fingers together. "Well," she said, "if you feel that strongly about it, you can hire a lawyer. But in the meantime, construction continues." I left the office with my heart pounding in my chest and fury in my veins. The lawsuit, within 2 weeks, the road was fully paved, cutting my land into 2 awkward halves, ruining its value, and leaving my family devastated. But that wasn't the end. A thick envelope arrived in the mail one gray Tuesday morning, and when I tore open, my hands went cold. It was a lawsuit from the HOA. They were suing me. The claim: obstruction of community development and interference with HOA operations. They were accusing me of to sabotage their road project, harassing the workers, and of damaging community property. Community property, they called it, as if my land was theirs all along. Emily burst into tears when she read it. Our kids were scared we'd lose the house. And for a moment, I felt like the fight was too big for me to win. HOAs are notorious for having deep pockets, and they thrive on grinding people down with endless legal fees. But then something inside me snapped. I remembered the years of work I had put into that property, the nights I stayed up fixing the fence, the weekends Emily and I spent planting the garden, the countless memories our kids had made under that oak tree. This wasn't just land, it was ours. And no power-hungry HOA was going to steal it from us, so I hired a lawyer. A tough one. A man named Richard who had spent years going head-to-head with HOAs across the state. When I showed him the paperwork, he chuckled dryly. "They think they've got you cornered," he said, flipping through the lawsuit. "But what they've really done is stepped into a minefield. They trespassed, destroyed your property, and violated your rights. If you're willing to fight, we can not only beat this case, we can turn it against them." Oh, for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. The turning point, the battle that followed, wasn't easy. The HOA tried to bury us under motions, hearings, and endless paperwork. Karen strutted into court like she owned the place, convinced they'd steamroll me into submission. But Richard dismantled their arguments piece by piece. He exposed how the HOA had acted without proper authorization, how they had failed to notify me, and how they had twisted the bylaws to suit their agenda. He even found that the construction contract had been signed before the supposed vote ever happened. Proof that the whole thing was rigged from the start. By the time the first round of hearings ended, it was clear the tide was turning. And as I sat there in that courtroom, watching Karen's smug smile finally crack, I realized something important. This wasn't just about my land anymore. This was about standing up to people who abuse power, about protecting families who get steamrolled by those who think rules don't apply to them. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for everyone in that neighborhood who had ever been bullied, fined, or harassed by the HOA. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. When the gavel echoed through the courtroom after the first hearing, I knew one thing for sure: the HOA had picked the wrong fight. But the war was far from over. The countersuit. Richard leaned over to me as we walked out of the courthouse that day. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with a kind of quiet fire. "They came after you with everything they had," he said, "and now it's time to hit back. We're filing a countersuit." The idea sounded bold, almost reckless. But when he laid it out, I realized just how much power we really had. Trespassing, property destruction, fraud, emotional distress. Not to mention the blatant abuse of authority. Each of those wasn't just a defense. They were charges we could bring against them. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Emily, papers spread across the wood like a battlefield map. She held my hand, her face pale but resolute. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly. "This isn't just about stopping them anymore. This is about destroying them." I squeezed her hand. "They tried to destroy us first. I'm not letting them get away with it." So we filed the countersuit. And when the HOA board got served, the panic rippled through them like cracks spreading in glass. The community's whisper. At first, the neighbors kept their distance. HOAs have a way of intimidating entire neighborhoods, and most people were too scared to openly side with me. But whispers began to spread. Mrs. Anderson, the widow down the street who once got fined for having her grandson's bicycle on her lawn for more than a day, left a plate of cookies at our door with a handwritten note. "Good luck. We're rooting for you." Where the Lopez family stopped me one evening as I was walking to the mailbox. Mr. Lopez lowered his voice like he was sharing state secrets. "We've hated that board for years. If you can take them down, we'll all owe you." It was subtle at first, but I realized something huge. I wasn't alone. People were tired of the HOA's tyranny. They just needed someone willing to stand up first, and somehow, that someone had become me. Courtroom battles. The courtroom became my second home. I'll never forget the look on Karen's face the day Richard unveiled the construction contract. Signed weeks before the supposed vote. She tried to mask it with that same plastic smile, but her hands betrayed her, fidgeting nervously with her pen. "Your Honor," Richard said firmly, "this is fraud. The HOA never intended to seek approval from members. This was premeditated." Karen's attorney stammered, flipping through papers as if some magic defense would suddenly appear. But it didn't. Another blow came when Richard presented photos of the property before the road. Lush, green, alive. And then after a gray scar cutting through what used to be our family's sanctuary, Emily cried quietly in the back as the images flashed on the screen. And even the judge's expression softened. The HOA's arguments crumbled one after another. They claimed they had easement rights. Richard showed that the easement was a narrow utility strip, not a 6-lane mini highway through private land. They claimed they had followed procedure. Richard exposed missing minutes from board meetings and emails that contradicted their timeline. Piece by piece, they were being dismantled. Karen's desperation, but Karen wasn't about to go down quietly. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I found a letter taped to my door. It wasn't official HOA stationery. Just a crumpled sheet of notebook paper scrawled with ink. "Back off. Drop the suit, or you'll regret it." No signature, of course, but I knew whose hand had guided it. When I showed Richard, he smirked. "Perfect," he said. "That's intimidation. Add it to the pile." The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Misused HO funds, secret deals with developers, board members pocketing money while pretending to serve the community. The road through my land wasn't just about access. It was about profit. They had planned to sell new lots for a fortune, and my property was the sacrifice they thought they could make without consequence. Now their whole empire was unraveling. Victory. The final hearing felt surreal. Months of battles, sleepless nights, and endless stress had all led to that moment. The judge's voice rang out, steady and unshakable. "The HOA is found liable for trespass, destruction of property, and fraud. Damages will be awarded to the plaintiff in full." My knees almost buckled. We had won. Emily squeezed my arm so tight I thought it would bruise, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in months, they were tears of relief. But it didn't stop there. The court not only ordered the HOA to compensate us financially, they demanded a restructuring of the board, and thanks to the overwhelming evidence of corruption, Karen and several others were permanently barred from holding positions in any HOA again. It was a total collapse of their power. A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, something incredible happened. The neighbors, the same ones who once whispered their support in hushed tones, came to me openly. They asked me to run for the new board. At first, I hesitated. After everything, the last thing I wanted was to spend more time dealing with HOA drama. But then I thought about it. If I didn't step up, someone else would, and the cycle of abuse might just start again. So I accepted, and when the votes came in, I wasn't just on the board. I was the new president. The first meeting we held was unlike any the neighborhood had ever seen. Gone were the threats, the fines, the condescending tone. Instead, we listened. We discussed. We treated people like neighbors, not subjects. We reversed unfair fines. We cut back on pointless restrictions. And most importantly, we built trust again. The lesson: sometimes, life throws you battles you never asked for. Sometimes the people who should be protecting your community are the very ones tearing it apart. But here's what I learned: bullies, whether they wear suits, sit on boards, or hide behind bylaws, only win if you let them. Stand your ground, fight back with the truth, and you might not just protect what's yours. You might change everything for the better. That road they built through my land, it's still there. But now, every time I drive down it, I don't see a scar anymore. I see a reminder. A reminder that when you refuse to back down, when you fight for what's right, you can turn even the worst injustice into victory. And as I look out at my neighborhood today, kids riding bikes freely, families smiling at one another instead of living in fear of a fine, I know one thing for certain: the HOA tried to break me. Instead, I broke them. And in the end, we all won.